Okay, this is the second in a series of demonstrations around APAutomation, around services POs. And if you want to look at a more detailed one around POs with GRs, click in the upper right-hand corner on the eye icon, and you can find that video. Okay, so what we're going to do is reacquaint ourselves with the Nipendo APAutomation landscape, how we look at transforming things coming from suppliers into invoices that can be acted upon by buyers. And we're going to look this time around services invoices. So before we look at the invoice from the supplier side, though, let's look in on SAP and an order, a services order, if you will, that has been set up for it, standard kind of services order on the SAP side. And we're flipping over to the supply side. They see on their portal a view of the PO. They might want to flip it. POGR has more in the video for that, but upload an image, and based on that image, extraction happens, and we can see what the details of the invoice are that are flipped over from the PO, and we can move on from there. With the invoice now being submitted, the supplier can go look at the details around it, and especially the validations, because now we're checking to make sure things are good with the invoice before it's submitted to the buyer. And if you look on the time-stamped validations, you can see scrolling from the bottom up a bunch of different ones that are really our different bots that are working on different rules and routings and other kinds of integrity checks and so on. There is a hold, though, on this, and as we roll through those different validations here, you can see that the document's on hold based on the validation system, and we all know why that is. It's because there isn't a receipt for it. And this receipt is in the form of a service entry sheet that's necessary on the SAP side, and that's what's shown here at the very top. There's no receipt existing for the order, and that's why this is on hold. So let's flip over to the SAP side, and you can see that the invoice is on hold there at the last line of that audit trail there. But what it's done is it's deposited in the inbox a workflow action that's required. And what we've done is we've configured that workflow action such that when you go into it, take a look at it from the inbox and click on the action itself, it will allow you to execute that action, approve that action, and it will create a service entry sheet automatically. So there we are approving the action. And now if we go and look at the PO itself, you could take a look at the purchase order history on that purchase order and see that a service entry sheet has already been entered for it. And that service entry sheet could be already approved, or in the configuration that we have, maybe you are required to do some other things like have an acceptance of the service entry sheet, and that's what's going to happen next here on these following screens. In order to execute on that service entry sheet, then go to transaction 81N, and and then you could see the details around that. Enter in the correct purchase order information and then release it, and from there it should be in the system okay as a received service, and now showing up in our log here of goods movement. Okay, we're flipping back over on the supply side and taking a look with refreshing on that PO to see if any goods have come in. And indeed, that service entry sheet that we hit on the SAP side has now been communicated over through the portal to the supplier so they can see that an acknowledgement of that service has happened. In addition, they can look at the invoice and see what's happened there. And the system has automatically processed the goods receipt that was missing at 1425 as shown there in the timescale at 1431 was recognized. And now the rest of the operations and bots can come into play against that goods receipt to make sure that the quantity is correct, that the amount is correct. And in the terms of services invoices, usually the bots are looking at not quantities but amounts to make sure that they coincide. So that's what's going on with this particular validation. And then with everything being good, this invoice ends up being automatically submitted into SAP, having passed all the validations necessary, and we're good to go in terms of getting it on track for payment. That's what's represented in the final stage there on the list as we go forward. Okay, back into the SAP side, taking a look at the log, you can see that the invoice was successfully added to SAP. Nobody on the AP side had to touch it because we were holding it until the service entry sheet was done. Here's a look at the invoice in SAP in all its glory. And if you roll on back to the log, we need to communicate the status of that invoice over to Nipendo so that the supplier can see that. And that's indeed what happens at the very end there. Flipping over back on the supply side, the supplier can see all of this information when it's going to be paid and can review a history here. That's basically a summary of what we saw. When it was sent, when it was put on hold, when it was released from hold, and when it was finalized. Thank you.